Welcome back to Mystery Garage. In this week's episode, episode 2 on Hot Rod and the 8-valve. All right, welcome back to episode 2. Now, in last week's episode, I did mention we're going to do this in 2 episodes. It's actually going to take 3. Part and parcel because I ordered all of the parts last week because of all the rain delays and flooding, and as well as the American Thanksgiving. It is going to take a little bit of time for those parts to get here, and boy, did we get a bunch of cool stuff. So, really excited to get those deliveries, but it might take a little while. In the meantime, we do have mock-up work to do. I picked up a few parts throughout the week. I want to get everything on the engine. We do need to do some wiring work and that sort of thing. So what my actual intention is going to be is that we're today going to do all the mock-up, make sure everything fits. We have to do things like moving the air intake temperature sensor, or we need to do some extension wiring to the MAF, all that kind of stuff, relocation. Make sure all that's ready to go. And I do want to quickly throw on the engine cover. We're going to modify the brackets for that, make sure everything fits. Then we're going to run off to cleaning, get everything really deep cleaned. Make sure everything's bright and spruced up. Then when the new parts should get here for episode number 3, we should be able to throw everything on in a timely fashion, know that it all fits, know that everything functions, and then move right into firing this baby up. So let's jump right into today's episode. All right, let's get you guys caught up real quick. So in last week's episode, we did a lot of comparison between the Mark IV AEG style 2-liter versus the ABA style 2-liter from a Mark III. We jumped into both engines, and we ended up actually stripping up off the top end of the ABA as well as the top end of the Mark IV 2-liter, and then we broke into kind of talking about which parts and why we were using it. It was kind of a very informative video that held a lot of information on these 2-liters, but then at the very end of the episode we got to work on stripping these down and kind of getting ready to put together a parts list. Like I said in the intro of today's video, I've ordered all of those parts. Not only did I order, all the gaskets we need and the seals we need and that sort of stuff, I also did kind of incorporate kind of a top end refresh, as well as throwing in some aftermarket parts that bring the hot rodding to the next level. So I actually got some upgraded injectors to go with it, which you guys will see when they get here. I did actually end up ordering a 4-into-1 race header for this. So we're actually in today's episode, we're gonna blast off the exhaust manifold and downpipe. We can actually probably sell it off to recoup a little bit of money, because don't forget, this is a Mark 1 with an ABA in it. The ABA is a tall block. You do need to have a downpipe that's lengthened by, I think it's 1 3/4 or something to that effect. So this one is made for that. So somebody can actually use this. We can repurpose this in somebody else's build who wants to do a tall block swap. And that will actually be able to put a little bit of money back into our jeans. But also we're gonna go through all of kind of the Mark IV stuff, putting it on here, mock fitting it, and making sure, because what we have to do is in the wiring for the Mark III, you have like the intake temperature sensor that doesn't exist in the Mark IV setup. So we're gonna have to actually drill and tap that sensor. We need to kind of figure out a location that works best for us. I'd like to keep everything hidden. Also in this week, I actually was able to track down a fairly mint condition cover. So this really, at least in my point of view, will help tie in this build to make the engine look very clean. So I want to throw it all on, but that's going to take us modifying some of these brackets to kind of clean them up, simplify them a little bit. And then we're going to make sure all this stuff jives together and fits well in this engine bay. And then we'll basically finish out today's episode, taking that stuff off to get cleaned, and then we will kind of hot tanked, so to speak, and then we'll end up waiting for the delivery. Hopefully we'll receive it this week. And then in next week's episode, we can throw this all back together. So without further ado, let's jack up this car and start pulling off that header, the downpipe, because there's no better time than now when everything is out of the way in the engine bay. And basically simplified, we can get everything ready to be able to throw in that race header once we receive it. So let's jump right into it. All right, so let's get you guys caught up. So I pulled the manifold and downpipe off. It was a little bit fidgety under the car just because I had it. I don't know if you guys can remember, but let's climb underneath there real quick. In one of the older episodes, I put a brand new exhaust system on it, and I didn't know what we were gonna do with the header at the time, so I actually clamped that pipe there, and the clamp caused a bit of a distortion to the inside pipe, or maybe that was from previous. But anyways, I had a hard time getting it separated, so I had to lop it off, as you guys saw in the time lapse, and then I had to pull it out separately. But I ended up getting it off, and here's the system I took off. I thought this was a pre-made TT unit, but it looks like somebody's just put in some lengthening pieces here, so it does serve its purpose, but there's not a lot of value to it. I mean, somebody could use it, but like I said, you can see how many cobbled together pieces it is. So this race header is going to be moons better than this, because this system actually chokes down before it got wider before. So that's a major positive thing. Also, while doing this, I realized that I don't know where I put it, the O2 sensor actually was cut. It was cut because I guess it had bottomed out here, and you can see it pinched the wires and broke them off. So this was never actually hooked up. It was actually stuck inside of a clamp, made it look like it was wired, but it wasn't. So doing this, obviously I'll pick up on a new O2 sensor, because you can see this one is super filthy and actually dented on the end. So it's time for a new one anyways, considering all the different defects it has. So hooking that up should make a difference just in that and how this car runs. So glad we found that anyways. And if the new race downpipe doesn't have an O2 bung, I will weld one in, but I think it does. It is a TT unit that we have on road. Anyways, so I got to work on just tossing everything on again, just small amounts of bolts just to make sure it lays in there real simply. I had a lot of people ask me, can you just use this Mark III ABA lower manifold? And you can't, and I'll show you why you can't. Whether this was intentional or not, you can actually see that the layout of the bolts are different. Hardware is actually smaller on the Mark IV unit, which is this one right here, than the bigger hardware on the Mark III. Also, like I said, you can see the bolt pattern is different. So you can't just swap the upper manifold, you have to swap both. And I haven't got around to it, physically measuring it, but I actually believe you can see, at least just by my eyes, I can tell that the ABA actually has smaller runners than the Mark IV. So again, that could also be something that helps the airflow and the torque in the Mark IV over the Mark III. So again, you guys can see not only is it the long tube section, but also I believe that the runners themselves are bigger. I'll measure them and see the difference in a little bit. But anyways, we're gonna move on to mounting this unit in the car. A couple things I'm concerned about or want to pay attention to is on the back of the Mark III manifold. A couple things we need to consider. We're going to be using this throttle body, obviously, but from everything I've understood, it's best to mount this upside down in the Mark IV unit, just to kind of move a lot of this assembly underneath. We want to be able to transfer off the cable or transfer over the cable stop or hook up where it allows that to function. So we'll have to make most of that onto the Mark IV as well. I talked about the air intake sensor we got to figure out. There's one other thing. Oh yeah, the bracket. You can see that bracket there supports the weight of the back top part of the manifold to the head to make sure that it's not vibrating when the engine's going to cause anything to crack or split. So I want to make sure I can use that bracket on here, but it's obviously going to pick up different mounting spots, so I may have to modify it. On the Mark IV unit, it actually comes off of this exhaust system setup where it screws through here. So this is its support and this is mounted to the head. So it's kind of the same thing, but just different way of doing it. It stops them from needing that bracket. I obviously don't want to put this onto the Rabbit, so I'm going to figure out some other way to hopefully manipulate this Mark III bracket or the ABA bracket to work on this AEG style manifold. And I'm sure it's possible. You can see right here, there's mounting holes there from where it worked before, so I might have to do a little bit of goofing around. We'll get something to work. That's the whole point of this mock-up day, so let's keep going. All right, you guys saw I kind of jumped ahead a bit. I had some nervous feelings about some stuff leading into this. Not related anything to the engine. It's more about stuff like that. You can see on the old setup, the previous owner, not the owner who owns it currently, but the person whoever put this engine in, notched the hood for the difference of the tall deck 2-liter and the intake. And I was concerned that this setup might be slightly higher, or different portions of the engine might be higher, and we'd run into some hood clearance problems. And that's exactly what happened. I went and threw the engine cover on just to see what the setup was like, lowered the hood, contacted immediately, actually was quite a ways from being able to be closed, took the cover off, did the same thing with just the intake, no cover on it, because the cover adds a little bit of height, not a ton, but a little bit. Went and closed the hood, same deal, still hits the intake. And I started to kind of think about, well, I know this swap has been done without hood clearance issues. I myself have put 2-liter ABA cross flow motors into Mark 1s and never had that be a problem. So I started to think, well, what's different about this? And I went and looked at the engine mounts, and you can see these are all polybush engine mounts, but probably for oil pan clearance, possibly, although it doesn't make a huge difference. All of these bushings are set for the engine, because, sorry, I should revert back. For those who don't know, these are off-centered engine mounts, so you can actually spin the mount within the mount itself to actually achieve either a higher or lower motor position only by half an inch or an inch. But in critical stuff like hood clearance, that matters. So I may actually have to go and rotate these mounts inside of the mount itself, if that makes any sense. The bushing inside the mount, I'll rotate it to achieve probably like a ½ inch or a 1 inch drop in the engine, which hopefully should get rid of some of the issues. When you do it to both sides, hopefully it might gain a little bit where that was never even necessary in the first place. So I want to try and actually do that, so I can sleep at night. But that's part of the whole reason of doing mock-up. Another thing I ran into, which I wasn't really conscious of at the time, is my intention was to use this Mark IV intake pipe, because it obviously goes into all the right evap spots and everything else. There is a massive difference in the Mark III size of throttle body. And I don't actually think, looking in, I think that's a taper. I don't think the actual butterfly is different in size. Again, I may have to measure that to see, but definitely the inlet size is different. So this Mark III pipe doesn't work, which means some of these connections aren't gonna match, and I'm gonna have to rethink that whole little setup. Again, why mock-up is important. I haven't done this type of mod before. I have to think these problems through. We also need to consider something like the original intake had the idle stabilizer on it. This does not have an idle stabilizer because it's got a different style computer. So we'd have to figure that out as well. It may not even need it depending on how it runs. I was hoping to just not have it, even if it runs a little lumpy, not the end of the world. But this now starts a bit of a new problem, because now I need to use something like this or adapt my own intake elbow. You know, that is possible as well, but that'll take some more time. Whereas this setup, because of the angle of everything, doesn't really make this an easy you guys can kind of see the problem. It's not going to be a simple solution. I may have to put this on in reverse, which is possible, and then have the intake right over there, which might look pretty cool. I don't know. I'm going to have to think all this through, which is why we do mock-up. Okay, before I start worrying about any of the hood clearance issues, as well as the cover, intake pipe, that sort of thing, I'm going to worry about the bracket that holds back the intake, because I just don't want to have it pressed down on, or the hood pressed down on the intake and have that cause anything to snap or pull or bend or what have you. So let's work on the mount in the back of this and figure that out first, and then we'll move on to the other issues we have.
I came from the mud, there's dirt on my hands. Strong like a tree, there's roots where I stand. Oh, I've been running from the law. Hope they won't shoot me down soon. They sing on a sleepless night. Try to catch me howling at the moon. Will you find me? Hope you find me. I'll be back home soon. When the sunrise, when the sun.
Oh boy, it's now quite a few hours later. I think it's like 4 hours later. I went to town on trying to organize everything in the engine bay. Took a lot of little small fabrication things, goofing around with stuff. I didn't really have to make anything, but I just had to readjust a ton of stuff. So there's a lot done from what you guys saw last time. So let's take a quick look at what I got going on. All right, so I laid out a ton of stuff. So let's start with engine mounting and all that sort of stuff. Actually, I jumped into the fabrication or the cutting up and fabrication of the brackets that hold the back of the intake. I basically took the one for the ABA, took it off. I had to separate them, so I cut them in half because the distance on this manifold is wider. So I had to cut them in half and I actually swapped them the opposite way and they worked out pretty good. I had to throw them in the vise, bend them up a little bit, but got them to work. Then I went and cut these down to be able to get the cover on properly. Obviously be cleaning these up and then painting them. But there was a ton of like the air pump stuff, cut all that off. There was the stuff that would have got in the way with the distributor because obviously the AEG doesn't have a distributor, so the bracket came way down there. So I cut all that off, cleaned it all up, did the same on this side. I was actually able to repurpose the AEG style belt cover, which it didn't have a belt cover on this engine before. So now that I had this solid mounted and I knew exactly what was happening with the height of the engine, I started to play with the engine mount. Now, I probably spent about an hour doing that and I didn't really make much progress. I made some. You can see the engine, it's hard to tell on camera, but it's slightly tilted this way because I didn't quite get to doing something on this side. I could probably swip that around. I remember though, I made a quote saying you can get about ½ inch out of changes out of it. That's a lie. You can get about a ¼ inch with the factory mounts, but actually it's the VR6 stuff in my other car that you can get even more travel if you move them around because they're made to be kind of adjustable. Not so much with these ones. So I ended up using a mount that I had that was newer and was able to reposition it to get it to sit a little lower. It didn't make a ton of difference. Really, it was probably kind of a waste of time, but it did make some. It made about a ½ inch difference, maybe a little less, but at least it's something. I ended up realizing while going through all the motor mount work that the rear puck mount was completely blown out. So I'm gonna have to get a new one of those. So it's kind of interesting going through everything and kind of cleaning everything up at the same time. Then I jumped into making sure I could get the engine cover on once I had this part hooked up and all that sort of stuff. And then what I ended up doing was cleaning up the notches in the hood. I really didn't like how part of it was cut out and part of it was maintained, so I cleaned it up and I made it so it's curved. I was super nervous about cutting into the hood because I didn't want to burn the paint on the other side of the hood, but I didn't, and none of that happened. Actually, some of these burn marks were from previous, so it kind of gave me a little bit of confidence. I can get fairly warm without cooking the paint on the hood, but there's actually absolutely no change other than the hood being dirty to any of the hood. Super happy with how this turned out. I'm really upset that the previous owner kind of butchered this part. It would have been nice to kind of have that complete. I can't modify or fix it because then I'm going to damage the paint if I start welding to try and repair that part. So we're just going to have to leave it. Overall, super happy with how the hood fits over the engine. Let me just grab, where did I put it? I think I got the engine cover back here. All right, so now that I have these pins here, you take the engine cover, just lay it over top. There's little cups in the bottom that go over those pins. Just clicks on, and then this goes right through like that, and there's a nut that goes on top. That really cleans up the engine. You can see a little bit more now of the tilt the engine has. I am going to end up playing with the transmission mount to try and bring that engine flat, but I was able to bring it down to where now the hood doesn't have any clearance issues. It's all super easy to set up. So it's closed, everything's good. Lots of clearance inside underneath the hood. And there we have it. So now, then after that, I moved to setting up this whole intake setup. And like I said, I really wanted to have a clean bay on this side and a clean bay on this side. So I'm going to change up some of the wiring here to kind of hide it. I'm going to get rid of this ground strap. I'm going to get rid of that and go back to the factory Mk1 rad control because that's the rheostat for the for the fan switch. So we're going to get rid of that, clean all that stuff up. I'm not going to keep this filter, but this is one I had from actually my boosted 16 valve. Just to kind of fit on there. There was a really weird tiny cone that was on this engine, and I really wanted to bring the whole engine and kind of snug it up. We're gonna do some, I'm thinking about doing some paint work in this part to really match everything up and clean everything up. But what then happened was it was time to figure out what I wanted to do with the intake piping. So away I went to work, laying out the intake piping. Now this is the ABA intake pipe reversed. I then was able to hook up the MAF, hook up the filter, lay everything out. And it took a ton of work to figure out how to get that idle stabilizer valve to work. If you ask me to repeat it, I wouldn't be able to, because what I did is I took all the pipes and took everything apart and then just started hooking it up how I would like to get to where I wanted to be. And that brought me to mounting it right there. And then I made the lines, you can see, go off the original pipe that comes out of the intake manifold, adapted right down to the idle stabilizer valve. Then it goes under here, cuts back over, and you can see it loop right there into the intake pipe. So it's set up exactly how the factory arrangement would have gone for airflow, but it's completely rerouted using roughly the factory lines. I did have to cut the plastic tube, but if I show you, you can see the routing is almost perfect, as if it was meant to be that way. And that really worked out well. Now, granted, all this stuff is dirty. I need to take it all off, clean it all up, and get ready to put it back together. But that's why this whole fab work day had to be done. There's just so much work that needs to be done. I still haven't addressed the wiring. I need to extend, actually the MAF worked out okay, but I need to extend the wiring that goes to the throttle position sensor. I do still need to tap in right here where I'm going to put the air temperature sensor. I do need to extend the wiring back to that throttle, the idle stabilizer valve. And there was one other thing I had to extend the wiring to, and I forget what that was. I do need to get the Mark IV dipstick tube and dipstick. Actually, I have the dipstick, but the dipstick tube on the motor I had was broken. But what it does is it raises it up to meet the cover. So that's another thing I need to do. And I've ordered a crankcase ventilation adapter for the ABA, which we'll deal with when it comes. And I just need to figure out what I want to do with the crankcase ventilation out of this valve cover. I may find a big plug. I might adapt it through a different hose to some sort of separator. We'll see. That's kind of the last undone issue I haven't figured out. I've located the mark of where I want to locate the air temperature sensor. You can see it right there. It's on a flat part, the most flat I could find on the intake, where it's kind of central air before it goes into each runner. So I'm pretty happy with that. Overall, you guys can kind of see what I was going for, or what I am going for. Today was a huge day in getting all the little things done and laying everything out and being happy with it. As far as the injectors go, I made a comment last episode that I might need new injectors. I do not. The ABAs will work. It's just my O-rings were just super old and conformed to the ABA intake. I ordered some new injectors with new O-rings. They'll seal up real nice to this Mark IV intake, so that's not an issue either. We're pretty much roughed in and ready to go. I'm ready to take everything all back apart now. We can clean everything up and get ready for the installation when all the new parts come. So thanks for watching today's episode. I really do appreciate it. Hope you guys can see what I'm going for here. I'm going for a really clean engine bay. And with all the hot rodded parts, make sure that you're kind of open and willing to work through some challenges. I had a ton today, and sorry guys, I cut the time lapse short. I just had so much to do, so much little finicky things that wasn't really worth showing you guys until the end, till I had it done, because showing you the process, I put things together, took it apart, put it together, took it apart, and just kept fiddling with it until I found out where I was most happy. Now, granted, things are dirty, they don't look as clean as possible. I'll tackle that between now and next episode, when hopefully most of the parts arrive and we can start throwing everything back together and doing it. And I'll kind of do it a little more thorough next time so you guys can see all the details that I addressed. But overall, I think it looks super cool. A lot of this is going to create power gains, which is even the better part. But that's it for tonight. Thank you very much for watching. If you really do like this kind of content, I really suggest you subscribe to this channel, guys, and follow along with more builds just like this. I need to get rid of that water bottle. Wouldn't that be cool? I really clean things up. Anyways, till next time, guys, I'm tired. It's time for me to head inside, get cleaned up. We'll see you next episode. Till then, take care.